Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're diving into one of the hardest and most rewarding ways to hunt mature mule deer, still hunting bucks in the timber. These are the deer that refuse to live in the open. They bed in dark cover, feed in tight pockets, use shadows like a shield, and slip away without showing themselves to most hunters. They're quiet, deliberate, and nearly impossible to kill unless you know how to move, how to see, and how to think like a buck that survived by disappearing. Most hunters avoid the timber because it feels claustrophobic. You can't glass big country. You can't watch basins from the next ridge. You don't get the fair warning you have in open terrain. Instead, everything is close, quiet, and uncertain. But the mature bucks that never show themselves in November sage flats or December winter range are often living within the first two layers of timber. If you learn to hunt these deer on their terms, slow, patient, and methodical, you'll find animals a lot of hunters never even knew were there. In this episode, we'll break down why older mule deer love timbered country, how to read micro-terrain and subtle structure inside the trees, how to move silently and with purpose, how to spot deer before they spot you, and when conditions are most favorable to still hunt effectively. This is a different style of hunting, more like slipping into a bear's den than glassing from a mile away. But once you get comfortable being uncomfortable, you'll unlock a part of mule deer hunting that stays wild, challenging, and deeply rewarding. Let's get into it. The older a mule deer gets, the more he learns that open country is dangerous. Bucks that live long enough to grow big, heavy antlers, and thick necks don't spend much time feeding in exposed sage or wide open meadows during daylight. They build their lives around cover. The timber becomes more than habitat, it becomes armor. Every decision they make revolves around survival, and the trees give them the best odds. The timber provides three major advantages: security, temperature control, and predictable wind. Security is the primary reason mature bucks stay in the trees. The canopy breaks visual lines, making it nearly impossible for predators or hunters to spot them from a distance. Human pressure pushes them deeper. When the hunting season rolls on and trucks start showing up on every ridge, older bucks slip into dark timber where they can see danger coming and slip away unseen. They know how to use every log, shadow, and patch of brush as a defense. Temperature is another huge factor. Timber insulates, it blocks wind, reduces heat loss during cold spells, and provides shade during warm afternoons. Bucks bed in spots where sunlight leaks through just enough to warm them, but not enough to expose them. These microclimates let them conserve calories at a time when they're already depleted from the rut. If they can feed, bed, and thermoregulate within a small radius, they stay put. Predictable wind is the final major advantage. Inside the timber, thermals and steady breezes behave more consistently than they do on open faces. Air currents drop into shaded pockets early and rise gradually as the day warms. Bucks choose beds where wind hits from behind and thermals pull scent from below. That gives them a 360-degree security bubble. Nose below, eyes and ears above. It's the perfect system for detecting danger before danger ever sees them. Beyond these fundamentals, there's habitat structure. Timber is far more complex than it looks from a distance. Behind the curtain of trees are benches, side hills, pockets of brush, hanging basins, and stripped timber seams that act as both bedrooms and travel corridors. A mature buck might spend the entire day within one or two folds of terrain, feeding lightly, shifting beds to manage wind or light, and watching the world below. These deer don't wander miles. They live tight in predictable patterns as long as their core area stays safe. When they do leave, it's usually because of pressure. Either hunting or predators force them out. Even then, they rarely abandon the trees entirely. They simply shift to new timbered pockets where the landscape gives them similar advantages. When you realize how deeply mature bucks are tied to timber security, you understand why still hunting matters. You're entering their living room. You're hunting them where they feel comfortable, not where you wish they were. Everything in the timber is designed in the buck's favor. The light, the cover, the sound, the wind. When you slip into that world, you must hunt as quietly, as slowly, and as strategically as he lives. Still hunting the timber isn't about wandering through trees hoping to bump into something. It's about understanding how mule deer use subtle terrain features inside the canopy. Mature bucks don't choose random beds. They choose the same types of pockets over and over because those pockets give them security, visibility, thermals, and quick escape. If you can identify those microstructures, you're going to stop wandering and start hunting with intention. The first thing to understand is that timber has layers. What looks like a continuous blanket of trees from a distance is actually a complex blend of benches, small openings, dark pockets, and transition edges. These features are what hold deer, not the timber itself. Everything revolves around subtle change. One of the most reliable structures is the bench. Benches are flat or slightly tilted shelves that interrupt a slope, right? They're cut in. They might be only 10 to 30 yards wide, but they give a buck a place to bed comfortably with stability beneath him. Benches often sit just below ridge lines or slightly above creek drainages, and they provide the perfect blend of view and concealment. If the bench also has shade and a brush cluster, it becomes high percentage habitat. Another key structure is the sidehill pocket. These are small breaks in the slope, indents, folds, shallow cuts, or even a low bench of deadfall that create a depression in the hillside. Bucks are there, they bed there because they can see downhill while letting their nose monitor the thermals around them. They often have a clean escape over the top. If you find a sidehill pocket with good cover and north-facing shade, assume it's holding something. Strip timber is another hot zone. This is where timber forms narrow bands across a slope or between open pockets. That structure gives bucks shade and concealment on one side with feed nearby. Strip timber is especially good when it runs along a contour that allows bucks to sidehill easily. When you can find strips of trees connecting two larger timber pockets, pay close attention. Those strips are travel lanes that bucks use to move between beds without exposing themselves. Next, look for edge structure inside the timber. Even deep in the trees, you will find edges, places where two habitat types meet. It might be a shift from dark timber to younger trees, or a break where spruce transitions into aspen, or a small meadow inside the canopy. Those edges create visibility, food variety, and sun exposure. Bucks love to bed just inside these breaks, especially on the uphill side where they can watch the opening without sitting directly in it. Deadfall clusters are also worth your attention, especially in thicker country. Bucks use down timber not only as bedding cover, but also as visual disruption. One log doesn't matter. Multiple logs, especially when mixed with brush, can create an ideal bed that hides a deer from most angles. Those spots can be frustrating to glass into because there's so much wood and shade, but that's exactly why older bucks use them. They know predators struggle to see them there. Another subtlety is light pockets. Inside dense timber, small breaks in overhead cover create spots of filtered light. Those warm slightly during the day and give bucks a place to loaf around comfortably. You'll find them just off of benches or tucked against shallow cuts. If you slow down and really pick those apart, you can sometimes spot a curve of a back or a hidden face staring downhill. Finally, pay attention to vertical breaks. These are places where terrain shifts sharply. Small rock outcrops, shallow bluffs, or tight rolls. Bucks bed just below those features so that they can disappear instantly if threatened. They also use them as windbreaks. Vertical breaks, often combined with strip timber, benches, or scattered brush, create layered security that's hard to approach quietly. When reading timber, the goal is pretty simple. Stop looking at the trees, start looking at the structure inside the trees. If the feature gives a buck a view, a wind advantage, shade, and an escape route, it's worth slowing down and dissecting. Mature bucks gravitate toward pockets where those four elements align. And if you focus on those pockets, you're going to start hunting the smaller world that timbered deer actually live in. Now, still hunting mature mule deer inside timber demands a mindset most hunters never develop. Out in the open, you can glass your way into confidence. You can watch animals from a distance and make a plan. In the timber, you don't get that luxury. You don't see deer until you're inside their world. That lack of visual confirmation makes most hunters rush. They start moving too fast, hoping they'll bump into something. But the moment you start hoping instead of reading, you've already lost. The timber requires you to hunt with belief instead of proof. You won't see a buck before you decide to slow down. You slow down because you believe a buck could be there. And that shift is everything. Most hunters walk until they see sign. Still hunters slow down because they're in the right type of sign producing structure. It feels like nothing is happening, but in reality, everything is happening. You're finally hunting the places mature bucks actually live. The rhythm is different. You move a few steps, then you stop. You read, you scan, you listen. Not for seconds, usually for minutes, long, uncomfortable minutes. Many hunters can't do that. They're conditioned to motion, not patience. They get bored, they start striding and walk right past the deer they came for. Every step in the timber risks pushing air, making noise, and revealing yourself. If you're moving more than you're stopping, you're not still hunting, you're just wandering through the trees. What surprises a lot of hunters is that still hunting is mostly mental, not physical. It's not about sneaking around like a ninja, it's about controlling your mind. Everything inside you wants to move. You imagine the buck is just over the next rise, so you rush toward it. You assume you've already looked there, but you haven't. Not slowly enough to actually see that ear tip behind the deadfall. When you force yourself to slow down to the buck's pace, you start noticing the pieces. A horizontal back line in a vertical forest of trees, the small shine of an antler, the faint flicker of an ear. Inside the trees, there are no shortcuts. You can't glass 2 miles from a ridge and gather information about what's happening down below. Your only actionable intel is what's right in front of you. That's why belief matters so much. You hunt pockets, not deer. You commit to each pocket like it could hold the one animal you're there for. When a hunter commits to the pocket instead of the fantasy of the next pocket, that's when he kills a buck in the timber. You must also be willing to abandon the feeling of progress. In open country, progress feels like miles, but in the timber, progress looks like moving 20 yards in an hour. You might spend 45 minutes on a single side hill pocket. That's not wasted time, that's hunting. The hunters who struggle with this style get impatient. They think they're not covering enough country and they hurry. The timber punishes hurry. A single careless step can light the entire hillside with alarm and send every deer into the next drainage. A good way to stay disciplined is to remember that the deer aren't moving fast, so you shouldn't be either. A mature buck in timber rarely moves more than a few hundred yards the whole day. He doesn't need to. Food, shade, and security are all close by. He'll stand, stretch, chew, reposition, rebed, and continue to watch. If you try to cover a mile to find him, you'll walk right over him and never know it. A lot of times they sit awfully tight. If you accept that he's nearby and behave accordingly, you'll eventually see him before he sees you. Most importantly, still hunting is about being comfortable with uncertainty. You might go hours without seeing a deer, then suddenly a buck materializes in the shadows at 40 yards because you were patient enough to let him reveal himself. This is hunting one breath at a time. One step, one scan, one decision. When you embrace that slowness, the trees stop feeling claustrophobic. They start feeling like a map, a readable, predictable place where a buck is doing everything he can to stay alive. Your job is to match his patience. Once your mindset shifts, still hunting stops feeling like wandering and starts feeling like solving a puzzle. Every micro move has purpose. Every stop gives you information, and every pocket becomes a potential kill site. That's when timber finally opens up and becomes huntable. Not all days in the timber are created equal. Mature mule deer use the woods year-round, but there are certain windows when still hunting becomes dramatically more effective. If you time it right, the timber becomes predictable and readable. If you time it wrong, you're hunting ghosts. Knowing when to slip into the trees is just as important as knowing how to hunt them. The best time to still hunt timber is when bucks are focused on recovery and survival rather than travel. This typically happens after the rut winds down. November takes a heavy toll. Mature deer come out of the rut burned down, light and tired. They've chased does for weeks, slept little, and eaten even less. The timber offers them shade, consistent bedding, and quiet security. When a buck hits this phase, he often locks into a small piece of cover and barely leaves it during daylight. That's the moment when a patient still hunter can slip inside his world and catch him mid-cycle, feeding lightly, rebedding, or simply repositioning as the wind shifts. Warm spells can be excellent. When temperatures jump, deer don't have to feed aggressively. Instead, they conserve energy by living tight inside the cover, nibbling here and there, and bedding twice as often. Warm afternoons especially can trigger subtle movement. Bucks might shift beds to chase shade or find cooler air at mid-slope. Those micro moves are gold for a still hunter because they can expose pieces of a deer that otherwise would never be seen. If you're glassing from a distance, you'll never catch that behavior. But inside the timber, those transitions are when everything comes together. High pressure days are another prime window. After a storm clears and the sky goes bright, deer often move into sheltered timber to escape glare and temperature swings. The woods act like insulation. When the sun is sharp on the open slopes, the canopy remains cool and dim, which helps mature bucks settle into predictable patterns. They'll rise to feed right there inside the trees without necessarily stepping into the open. That kind of behavior is tailor-made for someone slipping quietly through the cover. Midday is a sleeper option and one of the most underrated. A lot of hunters think timber hunting is a first light or last light game, but inside the trees, lighting doesn't change nearly as fast. Shade stays consistent longer and thermals remain stable. Mature bucks often stand midday to stretch, nibble, or shift beds as the temperature changes. That 10-second window is all you need if you're already close, glassing micro pockets and moving slowly. Midday is also when human pressure drops off. Most hunters leave, eat lunch, or relocate. Meanwhile, a disciplined still hunter keeps easing along the structure, and the mountain suddenly feels bigger and quieter. That's when bucks make mistakes. Snow changes the game again. Fresh snow quiets the forest floor and gives you silent footing, which is a massive advantage. It also exposes fresh sign, tracks, trails, and feeding marks, turning the timber into a story you can read with confidence. But the real advantage is visibility. Snow opens the shadows. A subtle ear, a face, a back line that blends perfectly into dark timber becomes a soft contrast against the white. With snow, a smart hunter can move slowly and read every pocket with far less risk of walking past a bedded deer. Pressure from the outside world also pushes bucks deeper. On public land, Thanksgiving week through mid-December is often a pressure roller coaster. Hunters, hikers, predators, all on the move. Once does start settling into predictive winter patterns, older bucks break off and slip into timber where they can feed alone and rest. They don't want eyes on them. They don't want to compete. They want silence. If the open country is full of does and smaller bucks, but your target buck is nowhere to be found, the odds are good he's within the first few timber layers above them. Wind events create another opportunity. When gusts start rolling across open faces, deer tuck into timber for relief. Strong wind makes them nervous. Scent disperses unpredictably. Movement is harder to detect. And bedding tight against structure gives them more security. If you time your hunt with those conditions, deer are far easier to find inside the canopy than out in the sage. The bottom line is this: you should hunt timber when deer activity turns subtle and tight. When bucks are conserving energy, avoiding pressure, managing temperature, or simply hiding from the world, the trees become their primary defense. That's when still hunting connects, not because you caught a buck wandering far, but because you slipped quietly into the place he already planned to be. Still hunting mule deer in timber does not begin by charging into the darkest, thickest cover you can find. That's the fastest way to blow an entire pocket of deer out without ever seeing them. The smarter play, the one that consistently produces, is to start at the edges. The first 2 layers of timber are where mature bucks often bed, feed lightly, and transition between open country and deeper security. If you learn to read that edge country before stepping deeper, you'll locate far more bucks and burn far fewer opportunities. The edge is where a buck's 2 priorities, food and safety, overlap. He can step a short distance into the open to feed when conditions feel safe, and he can slip just a few bounds back into security cover if something feels wrong. Mature bucks especially love this interface because it gives them maximum flexibility. They can watch the opening while bedding just inside the trees. They can monitor thermals below them while scenting danger that approaches from above, and they rarely have to expose themselves to do any of it. Think of the timber edge not as a line, but as a zone, usually 50 to 200 yards wide. Within that zone, you're going to find the microstructure that bucks prefer: benches, cut lines, subtle depressions, stripped timber seams, brush islands, and small breaks in the canopy. Any one of those features can hold a deer all day. The beauty of hunting the edge is that it also allows you to evaluate dozens of pockets efficiently without diving straight into the interior where visibility is limited and noise is harder to control. Starting at the edge also gives you a massive advantage with vision and angles. From edge country, you can often look both directions, into the timber and into the open. You're covering twice as much country visually. More importantly, the light tends to be better at the edge. In deep timber, shadows swallow detail, but near the edge, you can get enough contrast to catch an ear or a tine tip or a backline. If you're going to spot a buck before he spots you, this is where it's most likely to happen. Edges also let you learn the neighborhood without risk. Fresh tracks, faint trails, poop, and feeding sign near the edge tell you whether deer are using that timber pocket consistently. A well-worn sidehill trail 40 yards inside the trees is a strong sign that deer are bedding there. Scratched snow, nipped tips on bitterbrush, or a few scattered pellets may not look like much, but multiple small signals near the edge usually means there's a core area nearby. When you get lots of little confirmations, you know you're in the right place. Only then do you consider slipping deeper. Edges help you control sound too. Inside dense timber, every step echoes. Branches snap, frost pops, pine needles crackle. But at the edge, especially on soft grass, snow, or duff, you can move quieter and maintain more control over your sound signature. That allows you to still hunt effectively without announcing your presence to the entire drainage. Edges also give you the ability to use long sight lines to check deeper pockets before you commit. A small opening inside the timber, a shadowed bench, or a vertical break may only be visible from a specific angle, and oftentimes that angle is from somewhere near the edge. By working edges first, you use light and distance to your advantage. You find places that are worth closing in on, and you eliminate dead pockets before you waste time and energy inside the trees. Just as importantly, edges keep you from blowing deer deeper into the drainage. If you start in the interior and bump deer, they usually escape into even deeper timber, sometimes into the next basin entirely, eliminating your chance to hunt them again. But if you start at the edge and bump something, it often escapes into the interior. You may not get a shot, but the deer is still in the same drainage. You may have another chance later in the day or the next morning. Starting outside preserves opportunity instead of wasting it. There's also a psychological benefit. Hunting edges gives you more visual feedback and more sign confirmation early. You avoid the uncertainty of diving straight into the dark. When you find rubs, tracks, beds, or poop at the edge, it reinforces your decision to move slowly and commit to the pocket. That confidence keeps you disciplined, and discipline is everything in the timber. Once you've worked the edges and confirmed sign, once you know deer are living in that neighborhood, then you can start slipping in deeper. But now you're hunting with information, not just hope. You're moving into the trees with purpose, knowing that every careful step brings you closer to the buck that uses that structure. Moving through timber is its own skill set. It doesn't matter how well you understand mule deer behavior or how perfectly you read the terrain. If you can't move quietly, slowly, and deliberately, you'll never see a mature buck before he sees, hears, or smells you. Still hunting is a physical craft. Every step, every pause, every shift in weight carries consequences. The goal is not just to move, but to move in a way that keeps you invisible. The first rule is rhythm. Most hunters walk at a pace that's built for travel, not hunting. In the timber, that pace will get you busted instantly. The rhythm of still hunting is simple. Move, stop, observe, and stop far more than you move. You might take 3 steps, then stand still for 30 seconds. You might take 1 step and stand still for 2 minutes. The rhythm is built around the terrain, sign, and what your eyes are telling you. If you catch yourself just walking, stop. You're not hunting anymore. Next is foot placement. Every step should be intentional. You're not marching, you are placing your feet. Step on stable surfaces, bare dirt, moss, snow, or solid logs. Avoid twigs, branches, and dry vegetation that snap or crunch. Roll your foot from outside to inside so you can feel unstable ground before committing your weight. If something shifts or cracks, freeze. Let the woods absorb the sound before moving again. If you make a sound, something may have picked its head up to look, so if you sit still for a little bit, you might go back to feeding or relax. If wind gusts, use that noise to hide your steps. In snow, test for crust before stepping. Quiet snow is your best friend. Crusty snow is your worst enemy. If it's loud, slow down even more. Body control is equally important. A mature buck in the timber might be 40 yards away. The thing that gives you away is often not your feet, it's your upper body movement. Sudden shifts catch the eye. Keep your torso relaxed. Keep your elbows tucked. When you lift binoculars, do it slowly so your hand motion doesn't flash in open air. Try to keep your silhouette broken by trees, brush, or terrain. If you need to move across open space, do it slowly and low, keeping your profile small. Use cover as you move. Trees, stumps, and brush are not just obstacles, they're blinders. A tree between you and the basin is a shield. Move from shield to shield, always keeping structure between you and likely bedding pockets. If you can't see a deer, assume a deer can see you. That assumption will keep you honest. Stopping correctly matters too. When you stop, you don't just stand still, you fade into the structure. Lean against a tree, kneel behind a stump, sit in the shadow. Become part of the pattern. The less defined your shape, the harder you are to pick up. Deer see horizontal shapes. If you're vertical, you must break that profile with cover. Your breathing should guide your pace. If you're breathing hard, you're moving too fast. The best still hunters never let their breath get elevated. They move slow, they breathe slow, and their heart rate stays down. That calm keeps their mind sharp, and when your heart rate is pounding, your brain thinks about movement instead of observation. Sound discipline also means controlling what you carry. Loose straps, clinking buckles, rattling gear, those are deal breakers. Tape or secure everything. If you bump into brush, freeze. Let it settle, then move. If you accidentally snap a stick, don't panic and rush forward. That's when bucks are going to catch you moving. Instead, hold still and let the woods reset. A deer might look your direction, but if it doesn't see or smell you, it'll likely settle and go back into feeding or resting. The hunters who panic after making noise are the ones who blow deer out. The patient ones get second chances. Scanning is also part of your movement. Every time you stop, your eyes should go to work. Start wide, scanning through openings to the next layer of timber. Then work tighter. Look for parts, not whole deer. See the shadows between trunks, not just the trunks. Look for lines that don't match the forest, the curve of a back, the ear sticking out, the nose and sticking out from behind a tree. If something feels off, study it. Many timber bucks die because a hunter stared at an odd shadow long enough to realize it was a deer. The final movement rule is this: if you don't know what's ahead, assume a deer is there. This mindset forces you to move with caution. It slows you down. It keeps you honest. The moment you start believing the timber is empty is the moment you move too fast and blow your chance. Still hunting isn't about covering miles. It's about covering yards with precision. When you move like a predator, patient, quiet, and controlled, the woods stop rejecting you. Instead, they start showing you what's been there all along. Inside the timber, mature mule deer rarely present themselves as clean, full-body silhouettes. Most of the time, you're only going to see pieces: a horizontal line, a tine tip, an ear, a patch of hair, or a small shift in the shade. If you're waiting to see a whole deer broadside before recognizing what you're looking at, you're going to walk past every buck in the woods. Still hunting is about recognizing pieces, not the whole animal. The hunters who consistently kill timber bucks are the ones who learn to see subtle, imperfect clues that a lot of people overlook. The first thing to train your eye on is horizontal lines. A deer's back is perfectly horizontal. The woods are almost entirely vertical. Trunks, branches, saplings. Those contrasts are your greatest advantage. When you scan, your eye should naturally track across the grain of the forest, not along it, looking for anything that runs level across the slope. Sometimes you're only going to see 4 or 5 inches of backline above a log. Sometimes it's just a suggestion, the edge of a shape in the shadows. But once you learn to pick out that straight line, the timber starts talking to you. Next, look for ears. Even when a buck is fully hidden, his ears are often visible. They sit at angles that don't match branches, brush, or leaves. Ears catch light differently than fur. They have structure. In still timber, a tiny ear flick is like a flare. If you see a shape that looks like an ear but you're unsure, make sure you're stopping. Study it from different angles. Many half-imagined ears turn into deer when you give them time. Antler tips are another critical cue and almost always the first giveaway. They're vertical, they're structured, and they often hold a slightly different color than the surrounding environment in dark timber. Those tines sometimes appear as thin, pale lines between trunks. In snowy timber, they might be dark silhouettes against white. They never look like branches if you train your eye to see their symmetry and angle. Branches taper toward their tips. Antlers maintain thickness before suddenly terminating. That difference becomes more obvious the more you look. Then there's negative space, the shapes between things. Sometimes you won't see the deer at all. You'll see a hole in a brush patch that looks too clean, a shadow that looks too curved, or a gap that feels organized. When the brain senses structure that doesn't match the chaos of the timber, that's often a deer filling that space. If something inside you flags a pocket as odd, trust that instinct and tear it apart visually. The deer is often in the spot you can't explain. Movement inside timber is extremely subtle. A mature buck might turn his head 2 inches. He might shift his weight. He might flick a fly with his ear. That's it. You're never going to see a deer walking casually at 60 yards in the trees unless you caught him at the perfect second. Most of the time, movement is small. Train yourself to stare into a pocket for long enough that those tiny movements stand out. Let your eyes settle. Don't force the scene. When you stop trying to find something, you'll often start seeing what's already there. Color can help too, but it's unreliable. In bright timber, a deer's coat blends nearly perfectly with the trunks and shade, so instead of searching for tan, look for texture. Deer hair reflects light differently than bark or needles. It's smoother, it holds tone. Even in shadow, it has a softness to it. If you see a patch with distinct texture, stop. That patch could be the upper shoulder of a bedded buck. One of the best ways to see more deer in the timber is also to look small before you look big. Most hunters glance across a hillside and they assume they've checked it. But the deer are not standing in the open, they're buried. Instead of sweeping quickly, break the hillside into grids. Study one pocket at a time. A window between trunks, the shadow behind a stump, the edges of deadfall. If you can't describe what's in a pocket, you haven't looked long enough. Look until you can say, I know there's no deer there. Only then move on. Angle changes are a weapon. Sometimes you look into a pocket and see nothing. Take 2 steps either side and suddenly the bed is visible. Timber is full of visual obstructions. Small logs, brush stems, root wads. Move 3 feet and that obstruction shifts. Always work pockets from multiple angles before abandoning them. Finally, everything hinges on time. Seeing deer inside the trees is slow. You don't just glance, you absorb. You stare and let the scene settle. The longer you look, the more details emerge. The hunters who are willing to glass timber the way others glass open ridges are the ones who find the deer nobody else knows exists. Learning to see parts of deer instead of whole deer is the turning point in still hunting. Once you develop that eye, the timber goes from feeling empty to feeling alive. You'll start spotting bucks that other hunters have already walked past for days, and suddenly the woods won't feel mysterious anymore. They're going to feel readable. Glassing in the timber is not like glassing open basins. You're not scanning miles of landscape, trying to pick out animals on distant hillsides. In the trees, glassing is tight, precise, and focused. You're looking for 30 to 150 yards ahead, dissecting micro pockets where mature bucks bed, feed lightly, and watch the world without ever stepping into the open. The hunters who glass effectively in timber kill bucks most people never knew were there. The first rule of timber glassing is simple. Use your binoculars way more than you think you need to. A lot of hunters glass the timber with their naked eyes and only switch to binos when they spot something suspicious. That's backwards. In open country, binos confirm. In timber, binos discover. You use them to find deer you would never see with your eyes alone. Every pocket worth looking at is worth looking at with glass, even if you don't think there's anything there. The next rule is small angles. In open country, you move hundreds of yards to get new perspective. In timber, you move 3 to 8 feet. That's it. One small shift in angle can reveal an entire bedding crease or break the silhouette of a deer hidden behind a log. Most hunters don't understand how much visibility changes with just a few feet of lateral movement. Still hunters learn to treat every visual obstruction like a curtain. Move a little and the curtain opens. After every few steps, stop and glass. Pick a section of timber, maybe only the size of a 2-car garage, and tear it apart. Scan left to right, bottom to top, then do it again. On the second pass, you'll start seeing shapes you missed the first time. This slow repetition is where a lot of hunters fail. They glass once, see nothing, and right on to moving. The buck stays invisible to them not because he wasn't there, but because they never looked long enough. One of the most effective techniques is layering your focus. Start by glassing the most obvious openings, the larger windows between tree trunks and brush clusters. Then shift to the smaller ones, small slots and shaded seams. After that, glass only for horizontal lines, then glass only for antler tips, then glass only for ears. Each pass trains your brain to pick out different clues. This layered glassing forces you to see the little things instead of just the obvious ones. Shadow interpretation is another skill that matters. Timber is full of broken light. Sun patches, dark pockets, and inconsistent shade make it hard to read detail. But shadows also help you if you know what to look for. Deer often bed with just their upper shoulder or back exposed to minimal light. If a shadow looks too smooth, too flat, or too consistent, study it a little more. On the flip side, if a sun patch looks oddly broken or textured, dig in with your glass. Both conditions frequently reveal hidden deer. Your glass also helps you find rebed triggers. A mature buck might be invisible for hours, then he stands to stretch or adjust. If you're glassing the right pocket when that happens, even for just a few seconds, that buck suddenly becomes killable. If you weren't glassing that pocket, or if you've lost confidence and moved on too soon, the chance evaporates. One mistake a lot of hunters make is rushing glass movement. In the open, you can sweep quickly and cover big terrain efficiently. In the timber, that same sweeping motion guarantees failure. The moment you start speeding up, you stop seeing. You're no longer reading the fine detail, you're just waving glass around. The most successful timber hunters move their binoculars almost painfully slow. When you feel like you're glassing too slow, you're probably finally moving at the right pace. Tripods can help, but when you're hunting the timber, you a lot of times don't have time to set that up, right, or carry it with you. It's just too much bulk. But a lot of still hunting glass work happens handheld. That's okay. Just keep your elbows braced and your scan controlled. If you spot something suspicious, then step your binoculars or spotter on a rest, tree climb, trekking pole, or pack to stabilize and evaluate if you must. Remember, you're not trying to see whole deer, you're trying to see pieces. Bedded mule deer blend extremely well into the timber. You'll rarely see more than 10 to 20% of their body. That's why angle is everything. You might spend 20 minutes glassing a single pocket from 3 different angles, then suddenly a tine materializes, not because the deer wasn't there before, but because you finally found the one angle that exposed him. The final principle of small angle glassing is this: never leave a pocket until you're sure it's empty, and be humble enough to know you might still be wrong. When you learn to distrust your first glance and instead demand multiple slow passes, the timber stops hiding deer from you and it starts revealing them. Now, if you spend most of your hunting life in open country, you already understand the basics of thermals. Cool air falls, warm air rises, and terrain funnels airflow. Inside the timber, those principles definitely still apply, but everything becomes more subtle, more localized, and a little less predictable at times. Mature mule deer survive in the trees because they understand these microcurrents better than anything alive. If you want to kill a buck in his living room, you need to understand them too. The first key truth is that canopy changes everything. Trees shade the ground, which slows the warming process. Instead of fast thermal shift at 9 or 10 a.m. on an open slope, you might be dealing with falling thermals until midday. It's easy to assume your thermals have switched just because the sun is up, but if the forest floor is still cool, your air might still be pulling downhill. In the timber, the thermal flip is late, weak, or sometimes non-existent. If you push forward assuming the switch has happened, you might walk your scent straight into the deer you're trying to kill. The second truth is that wind inside timber obeys micro-terrain first, not general direction. A slope can be pulling thermals downhill, but a small cut bench or gully can trap that air and redirect it sideways. One little depression can back swirl your scent 20 or 30 yards out of your expected lane. The only way to stay honest is to constantly test your wind every few steps. If you're not checking wind continuously, you're just guessing. And guessing is a guaranteed way to alert deer long before you ever see them. A buck's bed is almost always chosen to maximize both wind and thermals. He uses falling thermals in the morning to monitor everything from above. As the day warms, if the thermal switch happens at all, he'll often shift beds slightly to maintain nose advantage. These shifts are subtle, 10 yards, maybe 20, but it's enough to keep him protected. If you already know where he's likely bedding and you're glassing correctly, these rebeds are your best chance of seeing him before he sees you. Inside dense timber, lateral wind is the real killer. Even if your thermals are favorable, a slight cross breeze can carry scent sideways into bedding pockets you didn't even know were there. This is why still hunters often need to approach from above and to the side, floating their scent into nothingness instead of into likely deer structure. If you have to choose, always favor a route that keeps your scent blowing into the least likely bedding locations. Another major difference is wind stability. Open country wind is often strong enough to stay consistent. Inside timber, speed drops, so direction becomes more unstable. Light wind that dies inside trees leaves scent hanging. It pools, and that pooled scent may drift unpredictably, especially in shaded holes. This is why still hunters often hunt on days when the wind is pretty steady, not just calm. Still days are some of the worst times to hunt timber. Your scent just floats around. The canopy also creates a mini pressure zone that drives your scent into weird places. Picture cold air falling from shaded timber pockets into small draws, while warm air rises only in patches of broken sunlight. These competing air masses create eddies, swirls, and dead pockets where scent rolls and hangs. Mature bucks choose beds that exploit these pressure patterns, maximizing their ability to detect danger from multiple directions. When you begin to visualize air movement like this, you start to understand why a bed is where it is and how to approach it without getting busted. Thermals also change faster in timber when light changes. A cloud can cover the sun, and suddenly that warm upslope push collapses back into falling thermals. That sudden switch can betray you instantly. Many blown stalks in the trees happen because the hunter didn't account for cloud cover cooling the face. If the slope you're hunting falls into shade from weather or time of day, assume thermal collapse is immediately coming and adjust immediately. Still hunting success in timber often hinges on planning your route with the wind at your back, literally and mentally. Before you take a step, you should already know, where is my scent going now, right? We always try to hunt into the wind, obviously, but if you think of it in reverse, you're going to note thermal changes. When will the thermal change? Where would a deer likely be based on that airflow? If you can answer those questions, you're not just sneaking through the woods, you're hunting with more intention. The final rule is simple. If the wind is wrong, don't force the hunt. Sit, wait, adjust your angle, hunt a different line. The biggest timber bucks die when a hunter refuses to compromise on wind discipline. Every time you talk yourself into just trying it anyway, you're teaching the buck that somebody's there. He'll leave, maybe not loudly, maybe not dramatically, but he'll leave, and he probably won't come back to that spot. Still hunting in the timber is a wind game first, a movement game second, and a visibility game third. If you beat a buck's nose, you're in the fight. If you don't, the game is over before it began. Killing a mature mule deer in the timber almost never looks like those clean cinematic shots you see on open country hunts. There's no long preparation, no wide open broadside, no time to debate angles. Instead, timber shots are fast, tight, and often awkward. You get one small window, sometimes no bigger than a basketball, and a few seconds to make that decision. If you're not mentally prepared for that moment, you'll hesitate and lose him. So let's talk about how to be ready the moment that buck materializes. The first thing to understand is that you must build your shot around lanes, not hopes. When you're still hunting, you should consistently and constantly be identifying potential shooting windows as you move. Every time you stop, scan for pockets where a deer could appear and where you could shoot. If you only think about shooting after you've spotted the buck, you're already behind. The best still hunters build a mental map of shot lanes before the shot opportunity materializes. You're always hunting with the assumption that you could need to shoot within a few seconds. And that is also going to help slow you down in your progress through the timber. Positioning is everything here. When you stop to glass or observe, angle your body instead of just standing square to the pocket. That quarter open stance allows you to mount the rifle or draw your bow without a big motion. Sudden movement kills timber opportunities. Small movements makes shots possible. You want to be poised to shoot with as little upper body motion as possible. Most shots in timber are off-angled, uphill or downhill. You're often side-hilling or shooting across a cut. Practice those angles before you hunt. Know how your bow or rifle behaves when you're shooting from your knee or a leaning position against a tree or braced against your pack. In the timber, perfect form is rare. You're going to have to be able to execute within your stability range, which means knowing your limits before you ever set foot in the woods. Shot distance is usually closer than hunters expect, often 20 to maybe 150 yards, but that doesn't make it easy. Closer shots can be harder because windows are tighter. You might only see part of the shoulder. You might have one small opening between branches. You're going to have to decide quickly whether the shot is ethical and make it happen with control. If you hesitate, the buck's going to reposition, step into cover, or vanish entirely. When you spot the deer, identify the vitals first, structure second. Don't waste time admiring antlers or confirming size, right? Timber bucks disappear fast. Find the shoulder and decide if you have a clean lane and then execute. If not, hold. Try to thread a shot through a questionable gap, and that's going to be how hunters wound deer. If you're bow hunting, wait for the animal to take one or two steps. Timber bucks often reposition subtly even while bedding, giving you new angles. So patience inside that moment is often rewarded. Because those shots are so tight, using structure as a rest is critical. Trees, saplings, rocks, logs can all be stabilizers. If you're shooting a rifle, wedge the forend against a tree or brace the stock against a trunk. If you're bow hunting, use cover to settle your pin and minimize your movement. The key is locking your body into the environment so your shot isn't floating. In the timber, loose posture creates wobbles and wobbles cost opportunities. The mental side of timber shooting is just as important. When you see the buck, adrenaline spikes fast. No buildup, no anticipation, he just appears. A lot of hunters rush. Their mind goes to maximum speed. The best still hunters slow down. They watch the deer for a second, they breathe, they decide, they execute. A calm mind makes good decisions, an excited mind makes fast mistakes. One of the biggest differences between open country and timber shooting is planning your exits. After the shot, deer often crash downhill or into adjacent pockets. If you made a good hit, stay put. Listen, watch, mark the last location. Because visibility is limited, you must mentally anchor where the deer went to make recovery easier. If you move too soon, you could lose the blood trail, bump the deer, or lose visual reference entirely. Follow-up shots are rare, but you've got to be ready. Inside the timber, if a buck doesn't fall immediately, he'll usually move laterally or straight downhill. If you can safely shoot again, be ready, but only if you have a clean shot window. Don't try to force a bad follow-up through the branches. You got to stay disciplined. And finally, accept that you won't get many chances. Timber bucks don't present themselves twice. You're going to get one look, one window, and maybe 3 to 5 seconds. That's it. The hunters who succeed are the ones who stay mentally ready before the buck appears, not after. They know their weapon. They've practiced awkward angles. They've rehearsed staying calm. When you respect how fast and narrow these opportunities are, you're going to stop wishing for perfect shots and start preparing for the real ones. That's when timber hunting starts producing for you. Still hunting mature mule deer bucks in the timber is one of the purest forms of hunting. There are no long glassing sessions on sunny ridges, no watching deer move from miles away, and no easy confirmation that you're even in the right place. Instead, the hunt becomes more intimate. You slip into the buck's world without fanfare, one careful step at a time, and you learn to trust your ability to read the mountains on feel, not just sight. What makes this style so addicting is its simplicity. No distance, no speed, no shortcuts. As a hunter, the woods and a buck that has survived by living where most people refuse to go. The rules are harsher here. The margin for error is thin. Sound matters. Wind matters. Body position matters. A single bad step can end the entire hunt, and you may never know it happened. When you get into it right, your patience matches his. Everything comes together then in a way that feels earned. The timber rewards commitment, not luck. Anybody can hike a ridge and glass hillside after hillside. Not many can move 50 yards in an hour without getting frustrated. Not many can sit still and stare into a shadow long enough to recognize a backline. Not many can trust that a good pocket is worth their time even when they haven't seen a single deer. That's what separates a lot of hunters who kill bucks in the timber from hunters who only dream about it. They stick with the process long enough to let the buck make the next mistake. The biggest advantage you gain by hunting timber is belief. Belief that the right pace, the right wind, the right read of structure can put you inside a buck's bubble without him ever knowing. Once you experience that, once you see a bedded buck at 40 yards who never knew you were there, that confidence becomes its own fuel. You're going to stop doubting, you're going to stop rushing, and you're going to start trusting the timber. Still hunting isn't for everybody. It's slow. It's mentally demanding. The woods feel quiet, sometimes too quiet. But if you embrace that pace and you learn to read terrain on a micro scale, the trees will start giving up their secrets. You're going to begin to see deer where a lot of hunters see nothing. You're going to start spotting parts, not whole bodies. You'll begin to predict where bucks choose to bed and why. And you're going to feel that moment when the mountain suddenly shrinks around you because you're hunting at the same pace the deer live. That's when you know you're doing it right. If you're serious about taking this kind of knowledge deeper, that's exactly why I built Team Backbone. It's more than just a membership. It's a way to sharpen your edge with exclusive tools, strategies, and a tribe of hunters who refuse to quit. Inside, you're going to get 20% off site-wide on all Backbone Unlimited gear, a member-only t-shirt shipped to your door every month, not available anywhere else, full access to the digital content vault of guides, checklists, fitness and backcountry strategies and mindset training, a private Facebook group with direct access to me, and a community of driven hunters who live relentless. Direct call, text, or email access to me for personalized advice on training, hunting strategy, or just sharpening your edge, and automatic entry into monthly gear giveaways. This is built for the guys who train for the hunt, push themselves in the off-season, and want to be part of a tribe that makes them better. If you're ready for that kind of inner circle, then Team Backbone is waiting for you at backboneunlimited.com underneath our membership tab. Thanks for being here. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.